We need universal health care. We need to cancel the college loans. We need to have tuition-free college and tech school, free childcare, paid family leave, guaranteed sick pay, housing, and living wage. We have to have a unified agenda.
I am pleased to interview Democratic candidate Marianne Williamson. Marianne Williamson is focusing on getting America back on track. And in the last few years, we've seen extremism rising on both ends and has made the upcoming 2024 elections a critical point. Thank you again for joining me today, Marianne. And I just wanted to say that back in 2020, I was mesmerized by the words that you said around loving each other to build the future of America.
Well, thank you. And thank you for having me on.
So to get started, the 2024 election is an upcoming year, and a lot of young voters have become very disempowered of the future of voting and what that means. And with Generation Z and millennials being the largest number of voters that are going to determine the future of America, how do you really plan to appeal to them, even myself?
Well, I wouldn't say I plan to appeal. What I plan to do, to the best of my ability on any given day, is tell the truth as I understand it. And then it's somebody else's decision whether or not their own thoughts and their own analysis aligns with mine. You mentioned how young people feel in America today. I certainly see the kind of emotional spiraling down. You see it among young people. You see it among others as well. But young people, I understand particularly the legitimacy of their sense of hopelessness and frustration, whether it has to do with college loans, whether it has to do with the cost of college, whether it has to do with the lack of health care, whether it has to do with the housing crisis. I understand why young people today don't feel that the government of the United States has had their back, because the United States government has not had their back. I say over and over again to young audiences, particularly Gen Z, you are not even 20th century people. You weren't even born there, some of you. And for those of you who were, you were just there for a little while as babies. So you're of a different century, and you don't see why you should have to live your lives at the effect of bad economic ideas left over from the 20th century. And neither do I. Now, what I'm sensing among young people is, yes, a dispiriting, a sense of hopelessness and frustration. But I also feel a healthy, appropriate, typical of youth, uniquely American sense of hell no, we're not going to stand for this. And so I feel among young people a real sense of checking out other possibilities. And I think I speak into that. Mine is the candidacy that's saying we're totally going the wrong way and we need to turn this ship around. When you say, how do I plan to appeal? I just plan to say that. And to young people who feel as I do, that's a connection right there.
Well, it kind of brings back memories to 2020, back in the debates when you talked about the realities of crises that young people face. And, I think there's a lot of momentum of young people feeling, does it even matter to vote these days? But the truth, in fact, in what you're saying, Marianne, is that if we do want to see that cultural and systemic change in our society, we have to demand for it and ask for those solutions. And young people themselves are having that power to change those narratives.
There's all this talk, anti-electoralism, all this talk, what point, what is the point in even voting? Anybody who says that to you is not supporting you in making changes. I understand that there's a lot of disappointment after what happened to Bernie in 2016. I understand a lot of disappointment after what happened to Bernie. Hey, I understand it myself on a very real, personal, visceral connection. In 2020, I'm seeing it now. So I certainly understand that the system is locked up. I get it. And I get how often people have felt, if I voted for this party, it would make a difference. If I voted for that party, it would make a difference. And it basically didn't. I understand all that. But I hope we can also look at this in terms of the larger arc of American history. The slave owners had it locked up too. Those who represented the institutional suppression of women had it locked up too. Mm-hmm. The Gilded Age and the purveyors of the overreach of capital at that time had it locked up too. Segregationists had it locked up too. And yet the abolitionists prevailed, and yet the women suffragists prevailed, and yet the organized labor movement prevailed, and yes, the civil rights movement prevailed. This is a tough time. There's no doubt about that. And this is not in any way to minimize that. But if we're going to repudiate forces of injustice, as our ancestors did, we also have to toughen up. We also have to rise to the occasion. No one thing is going to fix it. No one election is going to fix it. No one labor strike is going to fix it. Everything is going to fix it. It's taking a stand against our own complacency, not playing victim, recognizing this is a tough time, but we have to encourage one another and show up for this time. Other generations have done it. And in a very real way, what we are experiencing is simply the latest iteration of a struggle that has been with this country from the very beginning. The dichotomy between those whose hearts are ablaze with the possibilities of genuine economic justice and social and political democracy. All men are created equal, inalienable rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. There are people throughout our history who have stood for those things, struggled for those things, sacrificed for those things, even died for those things. And there have also been, from the very beginning, as there are today and as there have been in every generation, those who, for their own ideological and or financial purposes, had no intention of seeing those principles actualized and have countered and obstructed and blocked and fought against. Nothing new here, guys. But as I said, other generations push back and successfully, and it's simply our turn.
Yes, the resistance of movements have always existed throughout history. Let's talk about college for a second. So I went to UC Berkeley. Okay. Environmental science, was very told to go through the 4-year college pathway. Had a privilege to have FAFSA, but ended up coming out with a debt of around 10,000 USD, which is reasonably very cheaper than most undergrads that graduate with loans. Took me around 2 years exactly to pay off $5,000 for each year as someone that was working a $50,000 salary job as an environmental scientist. And 44 million Americans today have student debt, and they must start repaying it soon for their student loans. And this change specifically could financially strain many households after a 3.5-year hiatus. How do you plan to tackle the student debt crisis, knowing the fact of what happened recently with it being blocked?
Once again, I think it behooves us to talk in historical terms. These loans should never have existed. Before the 1970s, you had tuition-free college. In University of Florida had a system, University of Texas had a system, University of California had a system. This is an invention of banks, higher financial institutions, and so forth, a form of vulture capitalism, another tentacle put out there. Where do we find people desperate to make their way into whatever experience so that we could get them and we could make them want it so badly that they are willing to take out these loans? These loans should never have existed. There's something very wrong about it. In every other advanced democracy, they have tuition-free higher education and tech school, not only in every other advanced democracy, but in some other countries as well. So that's number one. Now, that is the rationale in my mind for canceling these college loan debts. We have, just as we have 1 in 4 Americans living with medical debt, we have the 44 million Americans that you were just talking about living with these college loans. Whereas the American dream used to be get a house with a picket fence, the American dream now for millions of people is the hope that they will get out of debt before they die. Now, when you described your own situation, as you said, that's small compared to what some people are living with. And I have to tell you, when I think of my own life back in my 20s, to have been saddled with tens of thousands of dollars of debt, and when the only reason they even exist was because I was trying to better my life, because people had told me, well, this is the way to close the wage gap and make your dreams come true and pursue happiness. There's something so wrong about it. The system itself was so predatory. You should be supporting the actualization of the dreams of your young people, not thwarting them, not cutting them off at the knees. How many of these young people, you were one of them, wanted nothing more. If I had $2,500 to discretionary spending to start my website or whatever. So it's simply wrong. It's immoral. It's wrong. So we should have, once again, a system of tuition-free higher education and tech school, like every other advanced democracy. And I would use the higher education bill to cancel those debts. There is a way to do it. And this is what we should remember. When we do that, it will stimulate the economy, just like universal health care will stimulate the economy. Tuition-free college will stimulate the economy. We really have to make that point over and over and over again. The more money circulates, the more expansion of your economy you can have. This idea, not just idea, the reality by which we now allow a small group of Americans to basically hoard all the cash, where policy and policy after policy makes it easier for those who already have capital to accumulate more and harder for everybody else to simply survive. We simply have to stop it. We simply have to stop it.
Exactly. And I think the confluence of these multinational corporations has become a huge issue in America. I mean, you talked a lot about the American dream being such as many dreams that are sold for many Americans that have grew up here. And it was sold to me. It was sold to me that if I went to college, you'd get a 6-figure salary, then you'd be able to afford a home. But, the fact is, as someone that's now in my late 20s, housing has become such a huge crisis for every young person. As someone that's looking for a home, I realize the price range minimum in the area of Los Angeles is almost $1 million for a home. And in every state across the country, many homes remain empty. Many of these corporations have these empty plots of land that they've privatized or plan to sell in the upcoming years. But thousands of Americans face homelessness. Do you commit to ensuring that there is affordable housing in the future of our generations of Americans?
If you go to marianne2024.com, you'll see my economic bill of rights, which is an updated bill of rights from Franklin Roosevelt. Absolutely guaranteed housing. And for the reason that you said, we don't have a lack of housing. We have a lack of affordable access to housing. When I was young, we couldn't afford the $1 million house, but we could dream of a day when maybe one day we could have, at that time, we wouldn't even think that was such a big number. But you're at an age where that's what you should be dreaming about. You should be able to feel that I'm working hard, I can make it happen. Young people starting their lives, partnerships, marriages, children. And the hopelessness, this is where so much of the hopelessness of our young people comes from. So we need a public works project when it comes to housing. We have 600,000 homeless people. And we should remember how many of the homeless in America are actually working full time. We also had over 3 million people who were evicted from their homes last year, which is more than we had during the housing crisis. So the president should not have stopped those moratoriums. What happened with declaring the official end of the COVID emergency is just people were thrown back to the emergencies they were experiencing before. Lack of housing is an emergency. Poverty is an emergency. Lack of healthcare is an emergency. All these things are connected. We need a massive infusion of economic hope and opportunity into the life of the average American with universal healthcare. That right there would just the sigh of relief when you look at how much of a cut that takes into anybody's ability to provide for themselves and their families. How many people are working at jobs they hate because of it? But that's they had to take that job because of the benefits. Also, as it relates to childcare. So we need a whole set of things. All of the issues that I mentioned here are moderate positions, considered moderate positions in every other advanced democracy, and they should be considered moderate positions here as well.
Absolutely. And I think with healthcare and housing and all the other crises we talked about, one of the most major ones that have been hitting headlines is the climate crisis. Now, we've had one of the hottest years last month in July as record-breaking temperatures across the globe. The current administration has said that they've declared basically a climate emergency. However, that's not an official emergency that's been declared. And implementations like the Inflation Reduction Program have been implemented to disperse millions of dollars in grant funding to different organizations and companies to advance the green economy. Now, the climate emergency to me is really personal as someone that has been fighting for the environment since the day I was born. That's really my subject area. And I think a lot of young environmentalists are worried that our government in America does not want to validate the climate crisis is real because of the misinformation and education that's put out there around climate change. Will you commit a climate emergency if elected in office?
Absolutely and immediately. But let's go deeper and look at the whole picture here. So you said that the president said that for all intents and practical purposes, he's actually declared a climate emergency. That's really terrible that he would say that. It is such a gaslight because it's so patently false. The president has given more oil drilling permits than even Donald Trump did. And the president has approved the Willow Project. The Willow Project is an $8 billion ConocoPhillips project on the North Slopes of Alaska. You put those two things together, plus the defense budget, given that our Defense Department is the single largest institutional emitter of greenhouse gases on the planet, and you have completely nullified any benefits that they're bragging about, which are otherwise healthy investments in green energy in the Inflation Reduction Act. When it comes to big oil, just as with defense, the Democrats and the Republicans line up. That's why it needs to be somebody from the outside. Somebody comes in and says, no, this has got to stop. Because young people, everywhere I go, I'll tell you something, everywhere I go, I do the following. I say, I'm going to ask you a question. If the answer is yes, please raise your hand. And if the answer is yes and you raise your hand, I'd like you to keep your hand up because I want everybody in the room to be able to see how many hands are up. And the question is this. If you are a young person, or if you have heard a young person say, under normal circumstances, I would be thinking of having a child. But given the state of the environment, climate change and so forth, I don't think it would be a responsible thing to do. Thank you very much. I never anymore see fewer than half the hands raise up. I don't look at data. I look at despair. Because you can look at the data. Hey, the corporatists, the neoliberals, the mainstream media says the economy is really good. But if you're looking at human despair and what's happening in people's lives and what's happening on the planet and what's happening when people are up late at night and can't sleep and are worried and are grieving, and that is grief, just like you just raised your hand. That's grief at the loss of what you perceive as a reasonable possibility. So you better believe I'm going to declare a climate emergency. We are going to mobilize on a mass level for a just transition from a dirty economy to a clean economy. And we are going to make it happen in our time.
Absolutely. And I think that's one of the biggest issues that we're facing today is how much these organizations are putting faith in the same institutions that are leading us to extinction. I mean, we are exterminating our hearts into extinctions because our species, specifically those in political power, have decided to gamble our futures away. And, talking about those industries that are responsible a lot for globally the climate crisis, America has a large carbon footprint and extractions and deals with different countries for exporting oils. The fossil fuel industry specifically has earned subsidies around $7 trillion. And the IPCC report noted that we need massive reductions and phase down to fossil fuels. Now, the general American, when they hear that fossil fuels must be defeated, they think, you're trying to take away my car, you're going to take away my job, and you're going to take away the economy that I have locally. How do we get people to transition to a green economy? And how do we ensure that these fossil fuel corporations are held accountable? Fact that they have so much subsidies going into them from our governmental tax dollars.
The American people are not the problem. The political elite say, I can't do it because the people don't get it. No. The American elite, this is what leadership is. The American people, when they have a leader who actually explains a situation, we can do anything. At the beginning of World War II, we didn't have an army to speak of. We had hardly anything. And England had nothing. Hitler, meanwhile, had been building up his military for 5 years, and every time he invaded a country, he absorbed their military capacity. Franklin Roosevelt knew we were in trouble. Plus, there was a huge isolationist impulse in the United States after what had happened with World War I. He explained to people, that's the kind of president I want to be, explain to people. People are not stupid, and people do not lack mobility. Tell them what the situation is, and then describe a plan.
Both Democrats and Republicans have received large amounts of funding from fossil fuel corporations. It's all legal, public out there. People can look it up. Yeah.
When it comes to big oil, as well as the defense contractors, they all line up. They all line up, but the vast majority, certainly the corporatists line up. And we have to call that. We have to stop pretending. And we have to stop enabling the performative posture of the current president who would say something like, I'm the climate president.
And, the climate crisis, of course, is a global crisis everywhere. I mean, global North countries have been noted to have large amounts of contributions to emissions, while global South countries have the least amount of contribution to emissions. Now, one of the things that's been increasing here is migration. Do you support safe pathways for migration, specifically what's been happening around Texas and the border of Mexico, where many immigrants are being pushed out using military physical weaponry on them, and for them to be able to seek a pathway or a legal citizenship to seek asylum. Do you support those initiatives, knowing the fact that many Americans have certain anti-immigrations, or specifically our politicians have anti-immigration stances about immigrants?
First of all, asylum is a sacred concept in the United States. All four of my grandparents were escaping oppression when they came through Ellis Island. This is a sacred pillar of the American ideal. And even if you look at it statistically, even economically, the immigrants to the United States give a lot more than they take. The contribution culturally is obvious, but even the contribution economically. More than that, Americans have been lied to regarding how much U.S. foreign policy over the last 50 years has contributed to the destabilization of so many Latin American economies. We had people in power who were so afraid of anything that had any kind of far left appeal that they would go with some real autocrats, really bad guys, thinking this was the way to go and really destabilizing these economies. You put that together with the U.S. drug war, and we helped exacerbate the situation of the horrifying explosion of the drug cartels back in the 1970s. One of the things that I think will begin to make a fundamental difference, we should end the drug war. We need to recognize that what we're doing is not working and turn around and take a different pathway.
One of the things that we're constantly seeing is our younger generations, like Gen Alpha, are the ones that we're going to be seeing in the upcoming years. Intersectionality, critical race theory has been critically slammed by a lot of conservative right-wing groups. How do you plan to approach these types of educational, institutionalized programs to ensure that history is not being rewritten or erased?
Well, first of all, let's be clear. The American president does not have a magic wand.
Yeah.
And nor should the American president have a magic wand. So it's not like everything that you and I are talking about here today, I'm going to go to Washington and within a week, all of that's going to be solved. It's not like that. The zeitgeist of this moment is not about what one individual or 100 individuals or even the president can do. It's about a rising up of consciousness among all of us and activism among all of us. Even some of the things that you've talked about just now, the president has very little power. I mean, Education is in the hands of the states. The president can't just come in and weigh on certain local issues or state issues and say, oh, we're not going to do that. I can use the power of the presidency, and there's certainly a lot of power in terms of federal action. But in terms of state action, my greatest power with some of that would be the bully pulpit. And I would use the bully pulpit, and the bully pulpit is not nothing. And I would seek to be a president who had the moral authority that I would know that a lot of people were listening. I mean, people are going to listen because you're president of the United States, but a real genuine sense that the majority of Americans know that we're making a huge transition now, that we have been going the wrong way, which the majority of Americans clearly believe, and we're going to turn around. And one of the things that we're going to have to do to turn that around is open our hearts to one another. It's going to take somebody who's not from that system. What they consider qualified is someone qualified to maintain and perpetuate the system as it is. We don't need another political car mechanic. That's not where the problem lies. The problem lies in the fact that we are on the wrong road. We don't just need a technocrat, we need a visionary. And so while I know that my candidacy is outside the box, I would argue that it's so toxic inside that box that only something outside the box will pave a way to a possible revitalization and repair of this country that we so desperately need. So thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to be here, Isaias. And people can go to marianne2024.com if they want to know more.
Thank you so much again, Marianne, for having me. And
thank you.
It's a pleasure working with you.
Thank you. God bless you, honey. Have a good night.